My friends, we're this is part three of the Poet of Theater series on the timeline of infiltration. So we started in classical times in ancient India, ancient Rome, ancient China, and in all these places, there were dedicated informants, dedicated spies who were sent out among the population. Now, part of the reason I'm doing this is because we are inundated with propaganda on Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, the movie theaters, everywhere in the New York Times bestseller list. Every entertainment we consume is going to be telling us that these cops and soldiers and spies, the CIA, the FBI, they're all heroes. But what I'm trying to show us here is that they perform a consistent role in class society, which is to monitor the population and keep down unrest and create dissent and stop us from unifying. So, anyways, ancient China, they had the Jin Wei. And in ancient Rome, they had the Frumentari, then the Agentis in Rebus. In ancient India, they had in the book the Arthashastra, a book on governance. 300 BC, they had this whole range of spies and infiltrators that were sent out among the populace. So we last time looked at the French Revolution. So the French Revolution is the ascendancy of the bourgeoisie. When we say bourgeoisie, we mean from burg, the burgess, the burgess, the burgs, like the burbs. These are the towns. They're not the highest, they're not the lowest. And this is where merchants and other professionals and educated people, men of property, began to accumulate power against the bourgeoisie. And so now, after the French Revolution, after the 1790s, after the Haitian Revolution, we're going to go about 40 years ahead of time, and we're going to see the birth of anarchism, socialism, and communism. If you remember back in the 1790s, the main threats to power were democracy and republicanism or nationalism, right? These ideas of the bourgeoisie taking power and perhaps with the common people. So now, after the French Revolution, the bourgeoisie has become more ascendant. And so let's go to our timeline. We're going to see now this opposition, instead of being against the feudal monarchy, it becomes focused on opposing the ascendant power of the bourgeoisie. Here we go. Timeline of infiltration. All right. So we see here 1840. Okay. There was the Chartist movement. The Chartist movement, it was basically about giving everybody democracy, giving everybody rights. And so in 1840 in England, UK, plainclothes officers attend the Chartist meeting and are challenged for their names, right? So people want to know who they are, and the cops just tell them who they are, right? They're permitted, and thereafter it becomes common to see uniformed officers taking notes at the Chartist meetings. So if you remember back in the 1790s, there weren't cops monitoring these guys. They were officials of the parliament, of the kind of feudal government. And we saw the magistrate William Wickham, who went from monitoring French revolutionaries to monitoring Irish nationalists. So now we have the establishment. Once the bourgeoisie takes power, if you guys know, there was the famous Kaiser, or before him, Bismarck. They start to come up with all these instruments of bourgeois control, what we now call state and bureaucracy. So now it's official. We have these plainclothes officers attending the Chartist meeting. And if you remember, I had that quote, I believe, from Epictetus about plainclothes soldiers coming into a tavern, getting you to speak out against Caesar. So this is a very common thing. Agents of the state, soldiers of the state in plain clothes monitoring us, okay? So then this in 1842, Scotland Yard is established. Now, we think of detectives, Sherlock Holmes, again, it's always criminals, right? These crazed individuals, these minor plots, but we don't know the truth, which is Scotland Yard and these law enforcement agencies were also created, mainly created to deal with what is now known as the left. We know that the cops were started as overseers. There's that famous KRS overseer, officer, officer, overseer, officer, like that. Well, yeah, that's true. And it was not just to keep the slaves down, not just to keep black folks down, but it was also to keep the poor people down, the Irish and the unionizers and all that. So let's go to the 1850s now. Oh, sorry. Go down here. In the 1850s now, there's already been the establishment of communism, socialism, and anarchism. There's already been this opposition to the bourgeoisie. So in the UK, Wilson and Adams state, this is one of the sources, 1850s and 60s, it was common to see police officers in uniform at Chartist meetings taking notes, okay? So they were monitoring potential revolutionaries or just reformists. 1850, this is a famous case. If you guys study Marxism, the history of Marxism, this is a famous case. William Stieber, spy master for, I believe, for Bismarck. He goes into Marx's apartment while Marx is in London, England, and he steals the list of the League of the Just. Now, some Marxists say this never happened, but from my research, it seems like a normal course of events. So he gives this list to his superiors, and these men are put on trial. Now, again, you understand the continuity of class society. The League of the Just was started based on the revolutionary Blanqui coming out of the French Revolution. So again, these were the men that thought it's not enough to get rid of the monarchy. We have to get rid of the bourgeoisie, of the merchant class, get rid of the rich. So now from Blanqui, it gets taken over by Marx, and Marx is infiltrated just as the French revolutionaries were infiltrated. And so the League of the Just later becomes the Communist League, and that is the organization that Marx and Engels are a part of when they released the Communist Manifesto, one of the most famous things ever written in the history of mankind. Okay, 1850s again, there's a foreign section of the detective branch in England monitoring refugees for radicals and reporting to their superiors, and at time their home government. So what we would consider the federal government. Now they're still reporting on radical refugees. Again, from 1790s to now, we're going to see this later with the Palmer raids around 1919, and still today, all this stuff about, you know, the illegal immigrants and all that stuff. It's also a crackdown on the left and potential organizers among the immigrants, right? So 1850s, famous Pinkerton Agency. So you have the formal agencies of the bureaucratic state, the nation state of the bourgeoisie, and then you have these private organizations like the Pinkertons. These private organizations still exist today. Now they're more likely to be called risk analyst companies or security consultants or just consultants, because they don't want it to be known that they're actively spying on us to crack down on dissent. Pinkertons are famous. We're going to see more of them later. So that's the 1850s. Okay, 1860, the Home Secretary of England calls for intelligence on the Skirmishes Committee. We're back to Ireland, set up by Irish Republicans in the U.S. The plan was to conduct military skirmishes like guerrilla warfare in the UK to persuade others to rise up and weaken English authority. Sir Howard Vincent sets up the Fenian office at Scotland Yard to gather intelligence on Irish revolutionaries. Again, from 1790 to the 1860s to the 1970s, we had this issue with Irish independence and Irish republicanism, and you're going to see that it bleeds over into the labor movement in America. We go to 1867 in the UK. There's a police informant, Croydon. He informs on an attempt of these Irish nationalists, the Fenians, to raid an armory and transport weapons to Ireland for an uprising. He also provided the information leading to the breakup of the Fenian group in London and the arrest of many members. Then in November, information provided by an informant leads to the capture of Richard Burke, the Irish Republican Brotherhood's arm producers. So you're going to see this infiltration of the Irish continues. Now, just like the slaves were infiltrated and there was constant incentive for slaves to snitch on each other because there was a constant threat of a slave revolt, we understand it's a feature of class society. When you oppress someone, there is a constant risk of them fighting back against your oppression and winning, right? So there is never any time when the government can safely, or the ruler, the master, the bourgeoisie can safely say, we don't have to worry. They have to infiltrate and monitor night and day. So when we talk about the surveillance state, AI, Palantir, all the stuff that's going on, this is a feature of class society, and this is the technology of the bourgeoisie. Okay. So 1870s, now we're in Canada. There was an attempt of the Fenians to take over parts of Canada. I don't remember the whole thing, whatever. But we have another informant, Thomas Beach. He supplied Canadian authorities with advanced intelligence on this raid so that the Canadian forces were able to fight it off. And this was the Battle of Eckley's Hill. Okay, let's see if we can get through to 1900. No, let's stop at the 1890s. Let's finish the 1880s here, okay? 1880s UK Special Irish Branch, already responsible for monitoring Fenians, is now assigned to anarchists. So you see, it starts with French revolutionaries, okay? French revolutionaries, then people in England who want democracy, and the Irish who want independence, right? Meanwhile, we have the monitoring and infiltration of the slaves, right? And now we're going from the Fenians to the anarchists, okay? And it's going to extend to the communists and the socialists coming up to our day where it's everybody. Black Lives Matter, where it's going to be the trans activists, the gay activists, we're going to see. So in the 1880s, right, Irish branch, this is all these cops monitoring them. 1882, London Metropolitan Police at a special branch to deal with Fenians and anarchists. See, it goes together. This is the left. 1883, the Assistant Undersecretary for Police Crime Jenkins reports to Home Secretary that he has a sophisticated system of intelligence in place with informants. And I believe we have some quotes. Let me see if I can pause this. Hold on. Okay, yes, from the 1880s. See, again, we think of all this stuff as modern because the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, always wants us to forget that this has always been going on. In the 1880s, this John Littlechild of the Special Branch says, I have to confess that the narc is very apt to drift into an agent provocateur in his anxiety to secure a conviction, and therefore he requires to be carefully watched. Okay, what is he saying, guys? A narc. Dude, when I was a kid, we said that like don't narc, don't be a narc, and watch out for the narcs, meaning undercover cops. So we still say that today. So he's saying that the narc is apt to become a agent provocateur. That's a fancy way of saying somebody who forces you to commit a crime. We're going to see this with the Okhrana in Russia, the intelligence agency in Russia, the cops in Russia. We're going to see this up until the Black Lives Matter movement, where these agents provocateurs who start out as narcs are actively trying to get people to commit arrestable crimes. Same with the Black Panthers. So, 1880s, guys, I want you to understand the consistency of infiltration in class society. Also, we saw Wilhelm Stieber, who broke into Marx's house. He was surveilling the communists and the anarchists, the revolutionaries, the people who wanted to overthrow the bourgeoisie for this famous Bismarck, who is the emblem of the modern nation state. He says, this spy says, the soil that nourished all efforts to overthrow governments was the poverty that was so widespread among the people, and that thus the only really effective weapon against subversion was the abolition of this poverty, which could be achieved only through better education and better pay for workers. So he's telling the guy who's spying on, and we'll see this a little more later, where the people doing this work also understand the reasons why we fight back and why we want to rebel. He's saying, well, the problem is that everybody's poor. If you had better education and better pay, you wouldn't have so much rebellion, which is still the same thing today, right? Okay. So let's finish up here and timeline. Here we go. Here we go. Yeah. So right. So in 1883, basically the cops in England, they have this big system of informants. And then in 1884, the Pinkertons, this private security agency that still exists today, they begin infiltrating anarchist meetings. And that's from a book by Butterworth. It's a great book, The World That Never Was. So 1885, Andrew Johnson, a Pinkerton agent hired by Chicago industrialists, became a member of the International Working Men's Association. Now, the International Working Men's Association is also famous in the history of the left. It was started by Marx. There was a huge split between the Marx guys and the anarchists, led by Bakunin. Very famous. And the International Working Men's Association eventually became the Communist International, or the Comintern, that was controlled by the Soviet Union and Stalin. So you see, this stuff, it keeps going. The bourgeois Aryan, it wants us to think that we're just fucked up because we're speaking out and we're against this shit. But no, it's endemic to class society as such. So this guy, Pinkerton agent, he becomes a member of the International Working Men's Association and begins reporting on them. And then he testifies at the trial of the Haymarket Martyrs. The Haymarket Martyrs, what did they want, right? 1880s. They wanted an 8-hour workday and a weekend and all this shit. And because of them, because of the struggle of those labor activists, those anarchists, those socialists, those communists, that's why we have 8-hour workdays. That's why we have something like time off, even though really most of us have to have 5 jobs now, so we don't get just 8 hours a day. Or we're lucky if we can get any work, and that work won't pay the bills. But you see, it's 2025, comrades. 1885 already. They're infiltrating the anarchists, the Irish, the slaves, and then the former slaves, and they're infiltrating the anarchists, communists, everybody, right? Union activists, anybody that is a threat to bourgeois power. They always want us to think the left is isolated. Oh, you have blue hair and you're a barista and you're a faggot. No, honey, it's always ongoing. Resistance is endemic to class society and it never stops. So, last one, 1887, UK Special Branch receives information from an informant in the Clan na Gael that they were planning to set off a bomb at the Queen's Jubilee celebration. 1887, during the Troubles in the 70s and 80s, there was also attempts to kill Margaret Thatcher. So, or the threat of it. There was car bombs, and there was one member of parliament, a sir, a duke or a baron or something. He was blown up by the IRA. So 1887. Now, what am I telling you? I want you to remember the timeline of the left itself. The bourgeoisie comes to power, really starts coming to power in the late 1700s, and you have these bourgeois revolutions, and you also have the Haitian Revolution, right? Which the bourgeoisie has still not stopped punishing Haiti to this day for that. And you have the American Revolution, which is the slave masters taking control of the colonies from the British Empire. And from the 1790s, those ideas of republicanism and democracy are not enough, because now in the 1830s and starting from that point, now they don't just want to get rid of the king, they want to get rid of the bourgeoisie, they want to get rid of the rich and have a communal society, communism, a society where society as a whole governs, socialism, right? And a society without hierarchy, anarchism. So we'll do more later. Anyways, that's part 3 of Poet of Theaters, a timeline of the infiltration of the left. What I want you to understand is that we are still being infiltrated today, and it's going to keep happening. Like I said, you can go on see all this propaganda on TV about the spies and the CIA and the Homeland Security and the FBI and all this stuff and the ex-soldier, but these are all agents of the state, and their only job is to repress the population to keep us working and to keep things going smoothly for them. But it's a non-stop fight. So you see what the bourgeoisie really is a constant predator, a constant attacker, a constant aggressor. Okay. I hope you guys enjoyed this solidarity. Like and subscribe. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Rednote. My Cash App is $ DMT79 if you want to contribute. $ DMT79. I'll put it in the comments. Solidarity, comrades.